Good evening, and welcome to Twilight Tales. Tonight, let yourself drift into the story of Spartacus, the slave who rose as a gladiator and led a revolt that shook the Roman Empire. Make yourself comfortable, take a deep breath, and let this legendary tale gently carry you away. Chapter 1. At the Confines of Thrace. The Dawn of a Destiny. The sky was tinged with a dull red in the east, as if the horizon itself were consumed in an omen of fire and blood. In the heart of Thrace's rugged hills, a light mist coiled around ancient oaks, weaving a veil of shifting shadows. It was there, on a plateau covered with purple heather, that the future slave turned gladiator and leader of men was born, Spartacus. In the poverty and taciturn abundance of these lands, an ochre stone village lay hidden, forming a defensive circle against the brutality of the outside world. The thatched roof huts, huddled close together, evoked a silent hive, buzzing with tiny, fragile, and determined lives. The stone wells, carved into the rock, whispered with promises of fresh water. Each drop seemed to carry the murmur of forgotten ancestors. It was in this harsh setting that a young boy, the son of a wolf hunter, became aware of the vastness of destiny. His piercing gray eyes reflected the shifting clarity of the Thracian sky, both stormy and limpid. From a very young age, he was initiated into ancestral rituals, moonlight dances, where warriors, drunk on drums and taut hides, sealed their bond with the spirits of the earth. Guttural, haunting chants that echoed through the valleys like a challenge hurled at the gods themselves. His mother, a modest seamstress, stitched linen tunics for sacred festivals and wove leather strips for spears. With a skilled hand, she embroidered abstract patterns, swirls of clouds, figures of totem animals on the hems of garments, imprinting the memory of their people in thread and fiber. Each needle plunged into the fabric like the promise of an invisible protection woven into the threads of destiny. His father, an indefatigable hunter, stalked wolves in the ravines. He spoke little, but his rhythmic, deep breath betrayed a quiet strength, one that inscribed you in the order of the living and the dead, through dusk and dawn. Young Spartacus watched, fascinated, the precise gestures of his father. He quickly understood that to track prey, a man must become both silence and presence, blend into the rustle of the heather, vanish from ear and eye. He learned to read tracks, to sense the flow of underground streams, to listen to the faint song of hidden springs. At an age when other children ran about shouting, he mimicked the stance of a wolf, sniffing the air, tuning his ear to muffled sounds. Yet the Thracian gods were sometimes capricious. One winter, a blizzard struck without warning, locking the mountains under a shroud of ice. The blizzard howled for 3 nights, tearing through stone and wood, and famine gnawed at the village's soul. They dug into reserves, hunted what remained, but the cold decimated the herds and weakened hearts. In this ordeal, Spartacus watched the once bold councils of men fade one by one, caught in the grip of frost like old lions felled by the winter pack. It was in the heart of this suffering that he felt, for the first time, the irresistible call of an extraordinary destiny. One night, shivering with cold, he ventured out of the hut, guided by a spectral glow. the Milky Way dancing and undulating arched over the valley. The stars seemed to form a luminous path, like a bridge stretched between earth and sky. The young boy raised his eyes, and in the icy silence he heard a whisper. "Son of Thrace, first your thirst, then your thirst for freedom." He thought he recognized the voice of the great goddess Sabazios, celestial rider, rider of fervor and renewal. That sound, or that vision, was the spark that set his blood ablaze. At dawn, Spartacus returned to the hut, his gaze transformed. His mother, sensing the scent of burnt wood, leather, and damp grass, understood without a word that her son had undergone a passage, an initiation. She placed a delicate hand on his forehead, burning with new ideas, and on the spot embroidered a golden thread talisman, a wolf under the rising moon. "Keep it close to your heart," she whispered. "It will guide you like the constellation of this winter." At dawn, the hunter returned with his quarry, a young stag, its flanks still trembling. He offered it to the elders, and the meat, shared amid murmurs of gratitude, restored strength and voice to the broken men. Around the fire, the village resumed its chants, songs of offering, songs of reborn vigor. The drumbeat, the hide vibrated under the strikes, and the children danced barefoot on the still frozen earth. This first chapter of his life laid the foundations of what he would become, not merely a man, but a symbol capable of igniting the thirst for freedom in those thought to be chained. Thrace teaches the patience of stone and the vigor of the torrent. Without one, the other unbalances the world. Spartacus, young and already imbued with this wisdom, carried within him the reflection of ancient mountains, deep forests, and starry nights, and in his heart a spark ready to set chains ablaze. Thus closes the first chapter of the epic, opening the path to the dark designs of Roman captivity, where the brute strength of Thracian would be harshly tested. But already, in that natal breath, the song of a revolution was inscribed. The Wolf's Forge. The dawn rose, painting the sky with a diffuse pink, when Spartacus found refuge by his father's forge. The incandescent embers glowed between blackened stones like the heart of a volcano ready to erupt. The steady tool, the hammer striking the anvil, pounded the air with a deep echo, and each spark seemed to herald a fiery future. Around him, the workshop exhaled an acrid scent of heated metal and soot, an indistinct blend of primal force and ancestral knowledge. The father, a massive silhouette draped in a thick leather apron, lifted a glowing iron bar, placed it on the anvil, and with a powerful blow covered it with new glints of red gold. The young boy, his fingers still stained with earth and resin, observed each movement with fierce concentration. The metal, under methodical blows, bent, yielded, and stretched, as if under the grip of an invisible will. It was there, his father explained in a grave voice, that one learned the first virtue of a warrior: patience. "Iron is tamed," he said, "but it tests you before it yields." In that smoky workshop, Spartacus understood that his future spark of hope would need to be forged like these promising blades. When the time came to craft the blade of his first spear, he felt the weight of the glowing object vibrate in his youthful palm. The wooden shaft, skillfully balanced to match the sharp tip, was bound with tanned leather straps. With each sanding, the rough friction of the abrasive on the wood produced a high-pitched murmur, as if the tree itself groaned as it transformed. Then the blade's edge, polished to a gleam, reflected the candelabra of hanging torches. The silvery glow cast sinuous shadows on the faces of the two smiths, evoking the ancient gods of the forge, brothers of Hephaestus. After completing the spear, his father led him to a nearby clearing with tall trees and dark green ferns. The grass, still beaded with dew, cushioned each step, enveloping his limbs in a morning chill. "Hold it like this," the old man ordered, adjusting his grip on the shaft. "Like a tree holds its roots, be upright, rooted in the earth." Spartacus then felt the spear become a natural extension of his arm. He struck the trunk of a mossy oak, and the blade slightly pierced the bark, leaving a clean notch, a sign of his nascent determination. In the evening, the blacksmith recounted Thracian tales and legends, the story of the lunar wolf, a fallen god-king turned guide for the lost, the fable of the celestial smith, credited with a breath powerful enough to shape stars. By the dancing light of a campfire, he whispered, "When you forge your own destiny, never forget that it's not brute strength that commands iron, but the intention that drives it." The words slid over Spartacus's soul, carving a deep furrow where the idea of a life shaped by his own hand took root. At the heart of this ritual, a recurring dream visited his sleep, a pack of translucent wolves galloping across a frozen lake, their paws brushing the ice without breaking it. Their howl rose deep and melodious, then merged into the low rumble of a giant hammer striking iron. When he opened his eyes, his entire body vibrated with new energy, as if he had just drawn some primal force from the heart of the earth. Each morning, the lunar wolf stood by him, a silvery silhouette, and asked in a frosty breath, "What will you forge today?" Gradually, the workshop became an intimate sanctuary where pain and exaltation intertwined. The blisters forming on the young smith's hands burst under the friction of tools, and each drop of blood absorbed by the packed earth floor seemed to bless the future blade. His muscles, under the strain, took shape in veins and tendons, revealing a body in transformation, a body carved for resistance, for struggle. On stormy evenings, when lightning streaked the sky and thunder's drums drowned out voices, Spartacus felt the forge vibrate like the belly of a sleeping dragon ready to roar. The subchapter ended with a final glow of dawn embers as the blacksmith placed a hand on his son's shoulder, darkness enveloping them in a bittersweet embrace. He spoke a single weighty sentence. "Now, you are no longer just a son of Thrace. You are a forger of destiny." In the silence that followed, Spartacus understood that henceforth chains would be struck as boldly as glowing iron. They would break one day, not by the hand of fate, but by his own. The rites of passage. The air thickened with scents of resin and damp earth as the community gathered at the foot of standing stones, immemorial circles erected by vanished hands. At dusk, the flickering glow of torches outlined the clearing with trembling light, casting dancing shadows on the moss and twig-strewn ground. The elders, draped in tawny animal hides, formed a semicircle around the granite altar where offerings rested, carved horns, polished bronze statuettes, colorful weavings. Spartacus, dressed in coarse linen and his face painted with ochre and charcoal stripes, awaited his initiation. His heart pounded heavily, a distant echo of the ritual drums. Each beat resonated in his chest like a primal call. The low, slow notes coiled around ancient trunks, awakening the murmur of slumbering forest spirits. Staghorns passed to the elder's lips, swelled the air with a deep ancestral chant. Time seemed suspended. Even the wind held its breath, and the still trees lent their ears to the ceremony. The women, veiled in white linen, bowed their heads, clasping their hands over their chests. Their vulnerable blackthorn eyes reflected the golden flame of the torches, and their lips parted in a silent chorus, as if humming a secret mantra. At the center of the clearing, the high priest advanced, his staff carved with animal figures, bear, vulture, serpent, recalling the invisible hierarchy of the world. "Children of the earth," he continued in a cavernous voice, "you who walk the thin thread between life and death, lend your ears to the ancients." He struck the altar 3 times with his staff, and a crack resounded like the opening of a millennial door. In that sound, Spartacus thought he heard the clash of swords, distant echoes of a coming war. The high priest extended a dark, mirror-smooth stone and passed it among the participants. Each young warrior must gaze into the night within himself, he explained, to face the reflection of his fears before mastering them. When the stone reached Spartacus's hands, he felt the weight of the universe. He brought it to his lips, kissed it, then pressed it against his chest, where the living flame of his blood beat. He breathed a silent vow. "May no chain bind my spirit." When he opened his eyes, the stone's surface seemed to ripple like an undulating horizon. This sign, the elders whispered, foretold an extraordinary destiny. Then came the physical trials, the wolf's current, a stream crossed by sharp pebbles where each youth had to immerse himself, hold his breath, and swim upstream to pick an elme dent, an aquatic flower with starry petals. Spartacus, bare to the waist, dodged a slippery stone, felt the icy water lacerate his skin, and plunged his hand into the eddies. He emerged with the trembling flower, presenting it to the high priest face to face like a luminous trophy. The applause of surrounding villages rose, vibrating against the hills. Next came the passage of the straps. A braided leather whip, lightly damp with sacred oil, was tied to each wrist. The youths had to cross the ritual clearing under light, symbolic lashes, a controlled suffering, a lesson in endurance. Skins creaked, muscles hardened, and red dust flew in golden bursts under the torchlight. Spartacus, with half-closed eyelids and slow breathing, received each blow without a cry. Far from breaking him, the pain awakened him. He felt his spirit expand like a sky opening under a storm. When the trials ended, the scent of blood and oil mingled with that of pine and damp earth. The elders marked the circle with offerings, touching each initiate's nape with a solemn finger, murmuring incomprehensible words. For Spartacus, this touch was a fragment of eternity. He felt an ancient fire course through his veins, a promise of power he did not yet understand. The ceremony culminated in the wolf's dance. The drums quickened, The horn clarion pierced the tumult, and all initiates and elders began to move. The rhythmic, jerky steps evoked the tending of a fire, lifting a log, tamping it, opening it, feeding it. Bodies bent and straightened, mimicking prey then predator, until suddenly silence fell like a guillotine. A single torch rose at the center of the circle, a living ember suspended. In that sudden calm, Spartacus, on one knee, raised his arms, his face turned toward the flame. He addressed both his ancestors and gods, whose names he did not know. I give my heart to the earth, my spirit to the air, my hands to water, my will to fire. The priest approached, placed a crown of woven laurel branches on his head, and named the young man Child of the Wolf. A silent roar vibrated in Spartacus's throat, and those present thought they heard, in the rustle of the wind, a distant howl. The night ended in a complicit silence as the assembly dispersed, leaving Spartacus alone before the altar. The first rays of dawn brushed the standing stones, tracing geometric patterns on the ground, silent witnesses to an ancient pact. The young man sat, his laurel crown resting on his sweat and dew-dampened hair, and gazed at the horizon. He felt neither pride nor fear, but a certainty. Henceforth his path would be marked by battles, and he would carry in every gesture the memory of this night when he became a warrior of freedom. At the edge of the forest, a lone wolf watched him, a gray silhouette outlined against the pale sky. When it vanished among the trunks, Spartacus knew he would not see it again. Yet the bond was sealed. In the young man's heart now beat the inexorable rhythm of the pack, and nothing could tear him from his destiny. Chapter 2. Roman Captivity. Chained to fate. At the first light of a promiseless dawn, the column of chained Thracians trudged along the Appian Way, its worn, dew-glistening slabs clinking underfoot. The chains, heavy as a burden of steel and suffering, clashed with each step, stifling groans in a low rasp. Spartacus, his wrists bruised by iron, moved with the convoy's slow rhythm, a funereal chorus intoned by exhausted bodies. Behind him, the horizon of rolling hills wavered like an illusion of unattainable freedom. The morning air carried the stench of Rome's underbelly, thick miasmas mixed with the acrid tang of manure churned by wheels. The decrepit facades of insulae formed an oppressive corridor, each gaping window seeming to devour the marching men. Pale children with cadaverous faces cast curious glances before rushing at the soldiers to scavenge a coin or a spit. The legionaries in gleaming armor struck the captives to shoulders with the flat of their hands, correcting any slowing with a sharp blow. The standards of several units passed by. The Thras Gemina, the Via Laudi, the Cis Ferrata. Each bore a bronze eagle, a symbol of inevitable superiority. When a standard-bearer let out the guttural cry of the legatus, the convoy faltered as if the ground itself buckled under the yoke. Spartacus, in the shadow of the eagle, felt the heart of Rome pulse, a force both alluring and terrifying. At the city's entrance, the column passed under the arch of Drusus. The stone arches, crowned with tarnished statues, stood as silent judges of crushed destinies beneath their vaults. A damp wind swept through the convoy like an ancient breath of freedom, reminding the young Thracian of the starry night of his initiation, but the chain yanked his spirit back to the darkness of a bronze cage, and the vision dissipated. The captives were then led to a low, unadorned building, its thick walls muffling sound and light. The smell of stale dust and wet iron filled the cramped space. Guards pushed the men inside, where rough benches and jars of stagnant water awaited. Spartacus glimpsed, in a corner, carved inscriptions. Vivere militi est servir. To live as a soldier is to serve. The irony chilled his blood. The slaves, lined up like cattle, were stripped for a medical inspection. Old scars, dislocated arms, poorly healed fractures, all were catalogued. An officer, quill in hand, noted every imperfection, every mark of past battles. When Spartacus's turn came, he kept his head high. The doctor, a wrinkled-faced man, examined his prominent muscles, his noble chest, then nodded imperceptibly. Value, average. Use, potential fighter. He wrote fair in the margin. Ferox, wild. They were then dressed in short gray coarse tunics. The new fabric chafed their bruised skin, reminding them with every movement of the violence of transition. Outside, a crude crowd pressed against rough bars. Low-ranking slaves, prostitutes with dulled eyes, construction workers, jeers rained down, collarless wolf, straw-slicing savages, future arena beasts. Hatred and disdain mingled with the coarse laughter of onlookers. Spartacus felt his blood boil, a dull anger ready to erupt. But he restrained his fist, measured the clank of his arm's iron, and inhaled slowly. In that void, he heard an echo of the Thracian high priest's voice. Tame the pain, forge your will. At that moment, the man became more than a captive. He became an unmoving statue, a rock against the tide. The convoy resumed its march, following the Tiber, whose heavy waters flowed toward the sea. Barges grumbled under arched bridges, their sleeping boatmen waking at the sight of chains and soldiers. The stench of rotting fish, mixed with marsh odors, heightened the nausea. Spartacus, his eye drawn to the silver glints on the water, thought that in Thrace streams ran clear, bearers of life. Here, even the river seemed to have lost its innocence. After hours of marching, they arrived at a monumental gate, the entrance to a ludus surrounded by guard towers. Lighter, tighter chains replaced the iron collars. The change was almost imperceptible, but the message remained, a new incarnation of the same confinement. An older slave, a hunched figure, greeted them with a questioning growl. In his eyes shone a glimmer, survival, earned through obedience. He spat on the ground and pointed to a vast gravel courtyard, bordered by vaulted cells. The soldiers pushed the newcomers into the inner arena, a pit where other recruits huddled, clutching meager personal effects, gourds, woolen rags, engraved medallions. The atmosphere was a cocktail of fear, impatience, and silent defiance. Spartacus, at the back of the pit, noticed an aging Roman, a former gladiator, sizing him up with a dull gaze. "You, savage, will soon know the dance of mortals." Night fell, and the courtyard closed under an inky sky. Torches lit up, casting harsh light on weary faces. Murmurs rose in a continuous chorus, tales of failures and wounds, faint hopes of freedom or gain. In this microcosm of desolation, Spartacus sensed a silent solidarity among the captives, a brotherhood born of shared injustice. Before falling asleep on damp straw, he placed a hand on the rough breastplate serving as a pillow. He vowed never to forget his name, to tie every breath to the memory of Thrace. In the stifling darkness, his mind lit up with a pledge. One day I will break these walls, I will break these chains, and my cry will be the thunder of freedom. The Trial of Arms. At the first glimmers of a fear-laden dawn, the recruits were gathered in the thick silence of a vast courtyard walled with crenellated stone. Rows of rough wooden benches hosted the aspiring gladiators, still clad in half-torn gray tunics. A stern-faced officer, clad in polished bronze armor and topped with a helmet adorned with a crimson crest, stepped onto a stone platform. His piercing gaze swept over the gaunt faces, gauging determination and fear. "Slaves!" he thundered in a cavernous voice echoed by the walls. "Today you begin your true service, learning to dance with death, to tame it, and to offer spectacle to Rome." He snapped his fingers, and guards appeared carrying new weapons, double-edged gladii, short daggers, tridents, and nets. Each metallic bundle gleamed under the rising sun, a promise of blood and steel. Spartacus, his muscles still taut from the march and hunger, observed these instruments of death with a mix of apprehension and fascination. The weapons seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The cunning trident glistened with the salty sheen of the sea, the dagger reflected the gleam of future blood, and the net seemed heavy with reaped destinies. The officer pointed to the gladius with an imperial gesture. "You?" He designated Spartacus with a gloved finger. "Stand and take this weapon. Show us your courage." The other slaves turned their heads, whispering, "There's the Thracian savage. Let's see if he holds up." Spartacus stepped forward with measured pace and grasped the gladius. Its weight surprised him only slightly, neither too heavy nor too light, just enough to wield the blade to the limits of courage or defeat. The instructor told him sharply, "Keep your hand steady, but let your wrist flow. The gladius obeys will, not brute force." Spartacus focused his gaze on the smooth handle, on the steel edge polished to a lunar gleam. His thumb pressed the grip, and his arm felt a strange connection. The tool became an extension of his being. A shrill whistle sounded. A cohort of soldiers surged forward, brandishing their gladii and encircling the recruits. At a silent command, the melee began. The sounds of clashing, jarring impacts filled the air. Trails of sweat and dust swirled in a whirlwind of entangled flesh and flashing blades. Spartacus advanced, determined, his first Thracian opponent, a broad-shouldered colossus, emerging with a raised dagger. The clash was brutal. The blades collided in a sinister echo, and a spark flared like the promise of a bloodthirsty desire. Spartacus blocked the opposing dagger with a precise move, his arm trembling, then pivoted his left foot, using the assailant's weight against him. The colossus staggered, and Spartacus seized the moment to deliver a horizontal strike, slicing the air with astonishing mastery. The man retreated, breathless, and Spartacus marked the first trace of success in the trial. Around him, the melee evolved into a barbaric choreography. One man parried a trident thrust and countered with a powerful hook. Another dropped to dodge a blade, then rose casting a net. The spectators, armored soldiers, struck their shields against their greaves at regular intervals, measuring the recruits' progress with a military rhythm. At the end of the combat, Those who had fallen to their knees praying for death were mercilessly lifted by the guards' boots and ordered to resume fighting without rest. Spartacus, his chest covered in soot and sweat, felt each tendon like a taut string resonating in the morning breeze. He understood that the trial was not just about spilling the opponent's blood, but enduring pain and overcoming fatigue. The officer sounded the horn, and the next moment the makeshift arena emptied. The recruits were lined up again, panting, muscles stiff, faces tense. The implacable guards collected the weapons, placing them on a glossy obsidian table with a funereal sheen. Then came the theoretical lesson. The officer drew a white chalk circle on the sand, sketching arcs with precision. He explained the geometry of combat: high guard, low guard, chest opening, wrist rotation to change the angle of the cut. A good gladiator doesn't improvise, he hammered. He calculates, anticipates, deceives the eye and heart of the opponent. He emphasized the concept of efficacitas, the ability to deliver a fatal blow with minimal energy expenditure. They demonstrated the difference between a wide, spectacular strike and a precise, almost imperceptible one, timed exactly when the opponent is off balance. Experimental recruits were called, and the most skilled executed sequences of deadly grace: parry, riposte, dodge, body twist. Spartacus, standing, sweat beading under his helmet, absorbed every detail, every word. His fingers mentally retraced the gladius's grip, adjusting pressure, feeling the steel vibrate lightly in his palm. He recalled his father's hunting techniques: the hunter's feint, the trap's retreat, the surprised prey's leap. He then understood the universality of the warrior's gesture, the fusion of predator and prey, symbolized by the falling steel and the sparking flame. In the afternoon, the exercise escalated. The recruits were taken to a smaller annex arena, where the ground was strewn with fine sand. There, in pairs, they had to repeat the same movements endlessly: high attack, body turn, lateral strike, dodge, slashing blow. The movements had to become automatic, almost hypnotic, until the opponent was seen as a shadow, a flow of energy to channel or break. Spartacus, he thought, had already seen this ritual in the eyes of wolves at dusk, when the pack prepares for the assault. Perfect synchronization, absolute silence, tension ready to explode. He executed sequences so fluidly that the officer, initially skeptical, nodded, muttering, "You're not a slave, savage, but a forger of the blade." The sun was setting when the final trial was announced. Fighting with a short sword and rectangular shield, standard weapons of the secutor gladiator category, against an opponent equipped with a trident and net, classified as a retiarius. Spartacus, called forward, found himself facing a lean, swift man, protected only by a leather shoulder piece. The challenge was to pierce the net, avoid falling or being ensnared, and above all, remain unpredictable. The fight, which began with the officer's final cry, was a duel of contrasts: strength against agility, assault against evasion, steel against mesh, power against finesse. Spartacus blocked a trident with the flat of his shield, then charged, first striking the ground to surprise the opponent, then his gloved forearm. The retiarius cried out in surprise and pain, his net slipping from his fingers, and Spartacus seized the moment to deliver a precise blow. The sound of iron against wood echoed, a late victory's resonance. At the end of the day, As the sun sank behind the ramparts, the recruits were released from training. Broken bodies and exhausted minds limped back to their cells, but Spartacus walked upright, driven by a new certainty. He had tamed the Roman war machine, not to submit, but to wield it when he became master of his own destiny. The soul under the yoke. Dawn barely pierced the horizon when clamor already rose in the ludus. The refectory drums echoed against the stone walls, marking the hours like an implacable metronome. Spartacus, lying on his damp straw pallet, opened his eyes to the morning toll of a bronze bell. The light, filtered through small slits, traced heavy lozenges on the floor, silent bars encircling his gaze. He sat up, bent his knees, and leaned on his calloused hands. Every nerve still vibrated from the previous day's trials, and dried sweat formed a rough crust on his skin. The metallic taste of dried blood lingered in his mouth, but he flicked it away with his tongue. He had to harden himself, body and soul. The cell doors opened with a sinister creak. Spartacus, with a dented helmet and spear in hand, herded the gladiators toward the inner courtyard. The slaves, now seasoned, followed without a word, so thoroughly did the ludus's discipline crush any hint of rebellion. A row of fresh water jugs, offered to quench their thirst, lined the southern wall. Spartacus drank deeply, letting the water slide over his tongue, flooding him with memories of clear streams and spring rains in Thrace. In the center of the courtyard, newer recruits carved the earth with their gladi, practicing parries. The veterans, haughty silhouettes, exchanged weary glances, as if each day of toil eroded their humanity further. One of them, a hoarse-voiced Gaul, approached Spartacus and whispered in his ear, "Here, your soul wears out faster than your body." The young Thracian nodded, aware that every blow given and received shaped his new identity, that of a docile killing machine. The ludus's supreme instructor, a veteran named Calenus, occasionally appeared among the ranks of aspirants. His ceremonial armor, nearly intact despite the years, told of decades of conquests. He would place his hand on the iron of the weapons, feeling the surface as if absorbing their memory. Calenus spoke little, only again, harder, "Don't falter," but his presence imposed a reign of fearful silence. After water came tough, black bread, cut into thick slices. The gladiators crowded around rudimentary tables, each taking a precisely measured portion to maintain strength without fattening the beast for the arena. Spartacus chewed each bite slowly, the acrid flour mingling with bland spices. The bread, rumor had it, was laced with borax to last longer, but it dried the throat and irritated the tongue. Yet he swallowed every crumb, sharing his water bowl with a frailer recruit whose lip bled under the stigma of a sword dropper. The post-meal began with a lesson in macabre eloquence. A gladiator had to wield words as well as a sword. A young Roman, a disgraced patrician, came to teach the captives the codes of the crowd and the Senate. In a honeyed voice, he described the rustle of purple togas in the amphitheater, how a slight sigh or affected exclamation could sway the spectators' clamor. Spartacus listened, captivated by the idea that even chained, one could become an actor in their own destiny through mastered speech. The morning stretched into a labyrinth of endurance exercises. The gladiators ran around a stone-paved track, circling the courtyard 200 times without pause. The dust-saturated air bit their lungs, and each stride kicked up an acrid cloud. The light iron chains, still present, clinked against shackled legs. After 10 laps, breathlessness made them stagger, fingers clutching the gate's bars as if to escape gravity. Some stumbled, collapsed, but the guards' whips forgave nothing. Spartacus, gritting his teeth, found an unsuspected energy within, a survival instinct stronger than pain. At the heart of the ludus stood a white marble statue of Martialis, protector of warriors. The marble's veins, like frozen blood, gave the impression the stone could come alive. At noon precisely, the miniature temple opened to let golden light filter through. A fleeting priest intoned a guttural prayer. Dispensa nobis fortitudinem, dona nobis victoriam. Grant us strength, grant us victory. The ashes of the previous day's sacrifice still reeked, mingled with stale incense, and the strange chant slid over their skins like a veil of death. The afternoon heat crushed the ludus. On the ground, dust mixed with fine sand, forming a whitish layer. Spartacus and a dozen others were trained in wielding the scutum, the large rectangular shield. The weapon, nearly man-sized, demanded perfect coordination, holding the guard, advancing, turning the body without breaking balance. Under the relentless sun, the shield's thin leather clung to the palm as if trying to swallow the hands. Instructors, with raised batons, corrected each posture, sculpting the recruits with their commands. When the time came for the cohort battle, a simulated large group clash, the gladiators positioned themselves in 2 tight formations. The orchestrated clash mimicked a miniature battle. One unit advanced in a testudo, shields aligned, while the other struck in waves, seeking to break the line. War cries erupted, hoarse, like a liberating torrent, and shields flung sand toward the opponent. Spartacus, in the front line, felt the weight of steel against his chest, the trembling ground, and the enemy's breath. With each impact, his heart pulsed with strange exaltation, fear transmuted into adrenaline, pain into power. When the final blow rang out, when the conch shells signaled the end of the conflict, each stood frozen, holding their guard. The pyramidal soldiers, silent witnesses, evaluated the volunteers' conduct. Some were ordered to step aside, their wounds and exhaustion marking their exclusion. Spartacus, though wounded in the shoulder, was allowed to hold his position. A simple nod of approval from the villicus was enough to ignite a spark of subdued pride in him. The evening approached, livid behind the ramparts, as the captives returned to their cells. The rustle of the guards' togas, the smell of vinegar cleansing the weapons, the clank of bolts, everything in this return tolled like a knell. Spartacus passed the statue of Martialis, memorizing every crack in the marble. He closed his eyes and made a silent vow. May my soul, forged here in pain, become the key to my deliverance. In the silence of the Roman night, when the torches went out and the ludus sank into near total darkness, Spartacus sensed a presence beside him. A slender shadow, an uncertain silhouette, vanished instantly like a specter of his Thracian memory, an echo of the pack, a call to lost freedom. He reached into the void, but found only the cool night air and the bitter taste of hope. Yet in the morning he would face the forge of steel and fear again. For the soul, even under the heaviest yoke, holds in its depths the inextinguishable ember of sacred fire. Chapter 3, Birth of the Gladiator. The amphitheater of terror. The Roman twilight differed from that of the Thracian hills. Here, the sky brimmed with a vivid, almost insolent orange like a warning. The amphitheater, a mass of stone and vertigo, loomed over the baths and popular quarters, drawing gazes and dread. Its monumental arches, several stories high, were adorned with partially broken statues, silent witnesses to a century of battles and spilled blood. Spartacus, wrists in manacles, climbed the steps blackened by the tread of thousands of gladiators. Each breath was a procession of smells: dry dust, old sweat, whiffs of tar and carrion, remnants of sacrificed beasts. The echo of his steps resounded in the side tunnel like a drum heralding the return of a mythical beast. On the imposed sand of the refectory, the recruits awaited their first official combat. The ground had been raked to form vast concentric circles. At the center, a circular basin held floating fragments of animal bones, remnants of an archaic ritual. Slaves in black tunics passed by, brooms in hand, while others dragged supplies toward the cages from which ferocious beasts would soon emerge. The crowd, already seated in the stands, formed a vibrant cloud. 1,000 voices, 1,000 moods, 1,000 expectations. Senators draped in purple togas slipped into the honor boxes, while humbler spectators crowded the upper stone benches, shouting, booing, betting. Heralding horns passed from mouth to mouth, emitting a low, hesitant sound like the breath of a monster about to awaken. At the arena's edge, iron cages creaked under the tension of the beasts. Lions, tigers, and leopards pinned against metal walls, their paws clawing the air, fur bristling. Their taut muscles sometimes let out a hoarse breath through the bars, displaying gleaming fangs. When one roared, the growl shook the earth, and the crowd let out a collective gasp. Hell was about to open. The side doors creaked open. The gladiators, led in single file, set foot on the burning sand. Spartacus felt the heat rise from the ground, caressing his bare feet. The Ludus's smiths had chosen stoic equipment for him and his companions: a bronze helmet with stylized wings, a round shield rimmed with iron, a short curved sword, the Sika, its blade evoking a serpent's bite. The clamor rose a notch. Notables tossed bags of money onto the sand to bet. Slaves opened their throats to exult. Faded frescoes of past emperors crowned the walls, watching the arena like ancient judges from times gone by. Amramillo, a seasoned veteran, stood beside Spartacus. 3 heads taller, his breastplate bore scars of twisted scales and bear claws. His face, weathered by past struggles, retained the indomitable pride of a man who had defied death. Without a word, he handed Spartacus a vial of clear water and a small leather talisman adorned with a stylized wolf's head, a sign of brotherhood or a warning. The signal sounded, a bare bronze horn projected its shrill vibration, and the cage doors burst open. A roaring tiger leaped out, followed closely by a bellowing lion and a leopard attempting a lateral escape. The gladiators scattered, forming a semicircle. The next moment, the arena became a choreography of survival. Spartacus, heart-pounding, advanced his shield. The slanting beast, its furry muscles taut, pounced. At the impact, the shield trembled. A deep vibrator like a lyre string struck. The animal skidded, claws raking the sandy felt. Spartacus seized the moment to surprise the beast with a swift thrust. The blade sank to the hilt. A bestial cry split the air, followed by an icy silence. The lion, in the distance, observed, assessed, like a strategist. The mumillo, roaring encouragement, suddenly faced the other beast. He brandished his gladius, attacked like an arrow, dodged a claw riposte, and ended by strangling the beast, pushing it into a corner. The crowd exulted, cursing or cheering depending on the outcome. Spartacus felt adrenaline prick his temples, his mind focusing on the present moment, every sound, every smell, every grain of sand. In a corner of the arena, a javelin throw, quickly stopped to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. Then the hunt for tamer prey. Boars and bulls were released, forcing the gladiators into tougher clashes. The buccinatores played martial fanfares, accompanying each movement with an anguished score. Spartacus, already drunk on combat, forgot his slave name. He was intoxicated by the precision of his body, the clash of his armor, the twist of his hips, the recoil of his back leg, the dull impact of his sword against flesh. He discovered himself a leader, an orchestrator of death. With each cry from the crowd, he felt the power of the moment fill his entire being. When the sun was high, the doors opened again, and the order fell. Suffice it! Slave handlers dragged the wounded beasts beyond the bars. The dust settled. Silence took hold. The gladiators regrouped to salute the crowd, raising sword and shield. Laurels were thrown onto their path, while water-bearing slaves came to refresh their aching limbs. Spartacus, helmet removed, sweat streaming down his forehead, gazed at the ovation. He recognized bloodied faces, eyes of stone or ecstasy, bruised bodies in the searing atmosphere. This triumph, however fleeting, marked his rebirth. From an anonymous captive, he had become a gladiator worthy of the arena. Yet a strange shiver ran down his spine. The confrontation had transformed him. The slave's dull anger gave way to the blazing flame of the fighter. He understood that each victory was a contract with death, a debt to be paid in the next arena. And as he returned to the tunnel, cheered and whispered about, he knew that to survive, he would need to master both steel and fear. Thus was born the gladiator Spartacus, in the amphitheater of terror, where life and death dance with every step, and a single misstep can seal one's fate. That day, the sand etched his name for the first time, and the crowd hailed him as a new oracle of blood. Blood Brotherhood. When the amphitheater doors closed behind him, Spartacus was led into a vaulted corridor where the air, thick with sand and sweat, grew heavier with each step. The torches burned low, casting frozen shadows on the decrepit walls. In the flickering light, he discerned the silhouettes of other gladiators leaning against the stone, exchanging weary but almost relieved glances, no longer feeling the beast's steel under their feet. A Roman with a weathered face, his gaze glowing like embers, stepped forward. It was Crixus, the Gaul, whose reputation as a peaceful killer preceded the legions. He placed a dry hand on Spartacus's shoulder and murmured his voice hoarse. "You fought like a starving wolf. Here, we are a pack. Without bonds, we are lost." Further on, Gannicus, a stocky Celt with a carnivorous smile, offered a gourd of lukewarm water. His ancient scars, deep furrows on his skin, spoke of seasons of combat. When Spartacus drank, he felt the sweet water soothe the burn of his wounds. In the back courtyard, slave healers cleaned the sand of blood drops with vinegar and linen strips. The acrid smell of disinfectant mingled with the lighter scent of medicinal herbs arranged on a stone table. A stocky woman, a low silhouette, anointed Spartacus's cuts with greasy ointment. Her skilled fingers made the sore flesh quiver. With each gesture, she hummed a guttural chant, a silent invocation to the gods of healing. Around the table, the gladiators formed a silent circle. Each removed his helmet, revealing faces marked by fatigue, shame, or pride. They exchanged confidences and stories, distant origins, irreparable losses, the senseless goal of daily survival. Spartacus, initially reserved, finally spoke. "I come from Thrace. There I learned to listen to the forest. Here I learned to listen to the clamor of the arena and your breaths." A murmur of approval ran through the group. Gannicus slipped in. In the pack, every breath counts. Tenacity and mutual aid, or death awaits. At that moment, a deathly silence fell, as if the walls of the beast house had pricked up their ears. Then Crixus raised a cup of thick red wine, like blood. He held it to the center of the circle and proclaimed in a clear voice, "Blood brothers, let us drink to our union. May the cord of destiny be woven by our mutual respect." They drank in unison, the spiced liquid burning their throats before quenching their thirst. The clink of lips on the cup's rim resonated like a sealed pact. This improvised, fragile, spontaneous ritual cemented their brotherhood. When the cup was empty, Gannicus caressed Spartacus's short blade and said, as if issuing a command, "May our swords train as our souls unite. Tomorrow, together, we will conquer." Outside, a storm rumbled. Thunder rose, a distant growl, then closer, like a drum resounding in the chest. Raindrops struck the uneven corridor slabs, an echo to their oath. Spartacus felt in this raw melody the invisible presence of the pack, a breath, a call. Before returning to their cells, they wandered into a hidden garden behind the walls, a rare patch of greenery where honeysuckle and lilies offered a delicate scent. Under the fine rain, the earth exhaled a wet aroma, a memory of a free world. They knelt, hands clasped, and Crixus uttered the final vow. "Under the stars or under blows, we will not fall alone. Our brotherhood will be the shield of our souls." Spartacus then raised his eyes to the sky. Between heavy clouds, the flickering glow of a wild star shone. He thought he recognized the lunar wolf of his youth, a silvery silhouette gliding among the constellations. A shiver ran through him like cold caress, and he knew the promise was heard beyond Rome's walls. In the night, the pact gave birth to a new strength. Exhaustion gave way to clear determination. Each returned to their cell, their step surer, their gaze moister. On the arena's sand at the next dawn, they would fight not only for themselves, but for the entire pack, and for the freedom they would reinvent, one battle at a time. The Wolf in the Arena. The dawn seemed hesitant, like a breath groping at the edge of night, when Spartacus crossed the amphitheater's heavy doors again. The sand, scorched by the first rays of the rising sun, exhaled a diaphanous, almost comforting warmth. The stands gradually emptied of the night's shadow, giving way to the morning crowd of freedmen and idle spectators come to bet on the day's macabre splendor. This time, the stage would not be a clash with beasts or an improvised duel against another novice. Today, they wanted to test the true strategic and tactical abilities of each gladiator. Word had spread of a supposedly elusive Thracian, whose blade danced faster than the wind. They wanted to see if the myth held true. After a solemn march along vaulted corridors lit by vermilion torches, Spartacus reached the central arena. There, a circular wooden arena stood resilient against time and iron, encircled by welded posts above primitive stands already echoing with cries of impatience. At the center, a large motif drawn in the sand depicted a pack of wolves howling at the full moon, a portent. Some whispered, but a warning. Others murmured. An officer held his breath. Spartacus of Thrace. The name rolled off the guards' tongues like an echo from distant mountains. Show us your art of survival. Raise your gladius and attack. Spartacus advanced, his worn leather sandals crunching on the planks. He touched the grip, felt the metal resonate, absorbed its weight. A buccina sounded, a long spiraling wail, and he knew the opponent would emerge from the opposite entrance. When the door's return clanged, a sturdy gladiator wearing a visored helmet burst in. He brandished a manica, adorned with bronze scales, a sign of a veteran seasoned in high-ranking combat. His short gladius gleamed, slicing the air with a metallic whisper. The colossus advanced, shield fixed, stance low, ready for impact. Spartacus moved laterally, observing the cadence of the secutor's steps. He gauged the guard's opening, the likely angle of riposte, the potential weakness in the bronze armor. Like a wolf sniffing the stag's flaws before the assault, he waited, muscles taut, ears pricked. The first clash was brutal, shield against shield, a low rumble, then the clash of steels, tiny sparks dancing in the morning air. Spartacus let his opponent make the first feint, pivoting just enough to dodge a circular slash, then counterattacked with a grazing strike, aiming for the bronze's joint. The blow split the fabric padding, drawing a surprised grunt from the veteran. The crowd, silent until then, let out a murmur of admiration. The officer frowned. The Thracian was holding his own against a seasoned soldier. The trial was precisely this, to demonstrate not only strength and skill, but the ability to read the fight, to anticipate and turn the situation. Spartacus felt his heart pound in his temples, irregular, in sync with the colossus's short breaths. He feinted a high thrust to distract the opponent, then slipped behind, striking the calf with precision. The blade dented the bronze, carving a deep furrow, and the secutor staggered, surprised. Without losing a moment, Spartacus leaped, raising the gladius overhead, ready to deliver the final blow. But he hesitated. In the veteran's eyes, he saw a mix of respect and defiance. A wounded wolf, he thought, but a wolf worthy of loyalty. He stepped back, slightly lowering the blade, offering the officer a salute. The veteran, surprised, responded with a nod etched with combative wisdom, and sheathed his weapon. Silence fell, heavy and solemn, as the Buchna sounded the decision. The fight ended on this unexpected gesture. Honor sealed rather than annihilation. The stands erupted in frenzied cheers. Some threw clothing, others gold coins, delighted to have witnessed this rare display where mercy became a strategic technique. Uniformed soldiers crowded around, offering Spartacus cups and provisions. For the Thracian, this moment was more than a victory. He understood that a gladiator remains a man even in the arena. The brotherhood of blood, loyalty between adversaries, recognition of courage, these were the true trophies. Leaving the amphitheater, the dispersed crowd gave way to a procession of slave-bearers. Spartacus was led to a basin where his face and hands were washed. The water, cold as a Thracian torrent, cleansed the sand mixed with sweat and blood, revealing the vigor of his features. A discreet slave draped a thick, ochre-dyed woolen cloak over his shoulders. In a corridor of papyrus and gilded frescoes, a mage smith hung a bronze amulet around his neck, depicting a wolf howling at the moon. He blew on the hot metal before closing it, imbuing the object with a mystical breath. "Wear this always," he said. "May the pack protect you." Spartacus contemplated the gesture's delicacy, moved. The Thracian wolf was reborn in the soul of a Roman gladiator. He felt a new balance emerge, strength and cunning, blood and forgiveness, man and beast united in a single being. The day ended in the warmth of a crimson sunset. The last rays brushed the arena's walls, casting long shadows as Spartacus, facing west, whispered a silent prayer to his ancestors' spirits. "May the pack watch over me, and may my blade serve justice, even in the darkest shadow." Thus closed the third chapter of his ascent. The wolf, tamed by cunning, master of the arena, ready to rally the pack for the revolution to come. Chapter 4. The Slave Insurrection. The Fires of Revolt. In the complicit darkness of the night, the ludus slept under the lax watch of sentinels drunk on watered wine. Oil lamps, hung on the walls, cast a flickering light that traced trembling silhouettes on the stones. Spartacus slipped out of his modest cell, tucking the bronze talisman under his tunic, and advanced silently toward the camp's heart. Each step resounded like a muffled war drum. Around the great forge, the vital place where blades were repaired and armor maintained, a handful of conspirators had gathered. Crixus with clenched jaw, Gannicus with fiery eyes, and a few Celts and Mauritanians whose battle-tanned skin already seemed to gleam with imminent freedom. Their faces, lit by reddish glows, lent the scene the appearance of a druidic circle ready to invoke forgotten magic. Spartacus, in a low, firm voice, outlined the plan for the uprising. Free the weapons hidden under the forge, neutralize the main gate's guards, and rally the sleeping comrades in the dormitories. With each word, the cold iron of the gladii vibrated with growing tension in their palms. In a coordinated move, they lifted the slab concealing the cache. Daggers, short blades, and 2 keeled helmets waited, coppery and impassive. Silence held sway over the camp until the precise moment when Crixus, with a swift gesture, disarmed the first sleeping sentinel, stifling his breath with a gloved fist. A faint crack tore through the nascent morning mist, the agreed signal to launch the assault. In one motion, The invisible pack leapt. Helmets were donned, gladiator drawn, and a restrained clamor rose from their chests in a single roar. Under the pale moon, the torches of the huts went out. The surprised guards raised their swords in hasty defense. Spartacus charged at the forefront, striking the shield of the officer on duty. The clash of iron rang like a knell. At the rear, Gannicus subdued 2 cohorts of men, redirecting them to block the kitchen exit. Everywhere, metal clashed. Captives' chains fell to the ground, and wooden barriers yielded under the insurgents' rage. In the sudden uproar, the Villicus appeared at the threshold, shouting disordered commands. His helmet slipped, revealing a pale, terrified face. Crixus felled him with a punch to the stomach, then forced him to lower his voice and kneel. Spartacus approached, placed the tip of his gladius under the officer's throat, and declared in a calm, solemn voice, "This camp is now a broken cell. Tonight we forge our freedom." Behind them, sleeping silhouettes had awakened, Celts, Germans, Syrians, all stirred by the same spark of revolt. Veteran Myrmillones rallied to the cause, broke cell locks, distributing helmets and weapons to those without. A sense of urgency electrified the air. Every second gained was a step toward freedom or death. A volley of flaming arrows shot from nearby towers, a sign that the ludus was defending itself. The insurgents rushed toward improvised artillery, a few ballistae, a buried capstan, harrows hooked to the ramparts. Spartacus ordered a diversion by launching clusters of torches mixed with arrows, creating unpredictable blazes on the wooden ramparts. Flames leaped, licking stone and sky, and dark smoke rose in swirls, partially obscuring the Roman archers' view. Under this cover, Gannicus and a few warriors toppled a crumbling section of the wall, opening a passage to the outside. The first freed slaves, armed with freshly sharpened swords, marched into the night in disciplined ranks. Through the gates Gannicus held open. The fresh dawn air made their faces quiver. Some let out a brief, almost incredulous laugh. Spartacus, meanwhile, lingered by the forge. He brushed his fingertips over the warm blade he had forged the day before, savoring this final contact with the workshop turned battlefield. Dying embers' sparks saluted the gesture as if blessing the uprising's success. Then he charged, bearer of the improvised banner, a soot-stained red tunic, raised on a javelin, stood as a symbol of resistance. Alongside his brothers, he exited the ludus and stood on the gentle slope leading to the Via Appia. Behind him, flames danced on the walls, a sign that the Roman world had lost a bastion of its tyranny that night. At the slope summit, he hesitated for a moment, gazing at Rome sleeping under the mist. Then, without a word, he lowered the banner and carried it toward nascent freedom. In his heart, the fires of revolt burned, ardent and untamable, heralding a war that would soon set the entire empire ablaze. Victories and betrayals. The army of insurgents, clad in rags and makeshift swords, advanced like a procession of ardent ghosts at the foot of Vesuvius's mountains. Ancient plane trees standing as silent sentinels, shivered under the sea breeze as if sensing the coming storm. Spartacus marched at the forefront, broad-shouldered, a silhouette forged in the pain of captivity and the flame of revolt. At his side, Crixus, his fists still stained with the first night's blood, and Gannicus, laughing but with dark eyes, scanned the horizon. Their first victory rang out near Nola when, in a cleverly prepared ambush, Roman brigades and Italic auxiliaries were surprised by the insurgent pack. The dew-soaked ground welcomed fallen bodies and sparks of struck iron. Falcons perched in the vines circled, while swords sliced through air and flesh. To the furious shouts of a Roman crying, "Pro Patria," answered the wild cries of the Thracians, "Freedom or death." The legions, disconcerted by the slaves' audacity, retreated under the triumphant clamor of the insurgents. Carried by this momentum, they descended south, crossing the Phlegrean plain, where fumaroles drew thin white swirls on blackened soil. There, on the still smoking slopes of Vesuvius, Spartacus set up camp, holding a war council under the canopy of aspens. Faces lit by torches in the mountains glowing red seemed carved in the hot air. Gannicus, pointing to a rough map drawn in the sand, declared, "To Rhegium the sea awaits. Cilician pirates have promised to take us beyond the Tyrrhenian Sea." Spartacus gazed at the distant sea, its dark blue rippling under the summer sun. In his mind echoed legends of ancient sea gods ruled by Poseidon, knight of storms. He turned to his makeshift generals and asked, voice grave, "Born a slave, forged a soldier, are we ready to entrust our fate to the cunning of lawless men?" Silence was the only reply, for all knew the stakes: freedom or a new, worse yoke. The troops set out, slow columns on the road to Nuceria, through gorges and valleys, scented with aromatic herbs. The heady fragrance of thyme and rosemary veiled the acrid memory of Rome. At the port, a fleet of 15 ink-black ships stood ready to sail. Weathered pirates, draped in salt-crusted tunics, greeted Spartacus on the jetty. Their leader, a one-eyed man, spoke in a grating voice. "Payment is made. You will be carried to freedom." But under the one-eye's lead, the word was a trap. Instead of guiding the insurgents to Sicily, the ships set sail, diverting their fresh water gourds to sealed holds where slaves and weapons were confined. When Spartacus realized the betrayal, the lead boat was already far from shore. Cries of anger mingled with the roll of a sea stirred by a rising mistral. Waves lashed the hull, and each man, abandoned to bitterness, felt the sting of despair. Yet the man forged in the Thracian forge did not give up. He shouted an order, and through a narrow passage at the foredeck, his brothers tore free from the ropes, breaking sails and masts to slow the treacherous fleet. The prisoners escaped on makeshift boats, while the lunar wind, howling like a wolf of foam, pushed the ships toward the coast. Under the gray sky, the insurgent columns reclaimed solid ground, panting but intact. Catching his breath, Spartacus gazed at the distant sea, now a patch of funereal blue. "The Roman world pushes us back to land," he murmured, "but it is there we will fight it." Despite the pirates' betrayal, morale held, resentment turned to resolve, anger to strategy. Under that salt-heavy sky, the slave's epic reinvented itself. Soon, Crassus's legions stood in their path, but using proven tactics, ambushes in Campania's shaded forests, feigned attacks on the Silurus bridges, the insurgents won victory after victory. Vineyards and deserted hamlets became their hunting grounds. Triumph chants, mixed with the sound of gladii, echoed in the gorges, and each victory swelled their ranks. Freedmen, indebted peasants, vengeful brigands, all joined the pack. Yet in the heart of these successes, the shadow of doubt emerged. Some provincial leaders, fearing a widespread uprising, feigned peace negotiations with Spartacus, promising amnesty for a return to servitude, while the honeyed words of a credulous praetor deceived some fugitives. Spartacus saw through the ruse and declared, "He who offers chains for a mirage of honor is neither friend nor foe, only a hidden traitor." He broke all truces, delivering thousands of treacherous slaves to Roman guards and burning peace letters in a blaze that lit the night to the hills. Under the ashes of betrayal, the pack tightened. Henceforth, victories would be only sincere conquests, liberated lands, captured ramparts, severed roads, and the echo of battles, carried by the wind of freedom, brushed against the very walls of Rome. Final battle and legend. Dawn rose over the battlefield like a languid knell. The thick, cold mist coiled between the impatient ranks of Roman armies and the united Thracian, Hebrew, and Gaulish insurgents. Crassus's drums sounded in the distance, low and methodical, while behind them the relentless clank of broken chains vibrated like a call to the absolute. Spartacus stood in the front rank, exhausted by months of marching and fighting, but every fiber of his being still burned with ancestral fire. An eagle soared, a graceful silhouette above the plain, circling like a deity come to judge mortals. When it let out a shrill cry, the insurgent pack raised their eyes, reading a portent. Freedom is won or lost under the sky's wings. Spartacus placed a firm hand on the shaft of the improvised flag, a blood-red cloth, woven from the rage and will of thousands of souls. He breathed in a hoarse voice, "For every fallen brother, for every betrayed hope, today we fight the ultimate battle." The vast field, a potential vast tomb, trembled under the dense crowd of Romans. The legionaries, arrayed in testudo, displayed their polished shields like a gleaming wall. Their helmets glinted under the pale sun, and each hammer blow on the shields formed a metallic echo, heralding a warlike storm. Facing them, Spartacus ordered the pack's formation, a horseshoe, bows to the ground, spears ready to charge. A single word whispered in Thracian triggered the assault. A rumble ran through the insurgent line, a mix of defiance and rediscovered brotherhood. As the front ranks charged, the ground shook under galloping horses and human footfalls. Javelins whistled, streaking the air, and dust, raised like a funereal cloud, soon engulfed the horizon. The cries of the wounded, the howls of auxiliary beasts, and the clash of weapons intertwined in a deafening tumult. Spartacus ran toward the heart of the melee, gladius raised, face streaked with sweat and dust. He felt the blade vibrate, an extension of his arm, and each strike opened a wound in enemy flesh, an invitation to life for his brothers. At his side, Crixus mowed down enemy ranks with a wide, precise sweep, while Gannicus, an agile scout, darted behind Roman lines to sow confusion. Together, they formed the spearhead of the uprising, the very soul of the revolt incarnate. At the field's center, Crassus, clad in polished steel, raised a ceremonial sword and rallied his legions into a rigid line. A sharp snap of Latin orders rang out, and the cohorts countered methodically, repelling the initial assault. Roman swords, longer and heavier, sought to break the pack by driving blades between the insurgents' light protections. The clash of warrior cultures, Thracian finesse against Roman discipline, turned the ground into a weave of bodies and blood. Spartacus felt fatigue grip him like an icy embrace. A deep gash in his shoulder drew a groan of pain, but he did not yield. Around him, friendly faces blurred in the bloody mist. He recognized the resolute gaze of a German, the fierce grimace of a Gaul, the fleeting gleam of a Chaldean. All lost and regained life with each shield thrust, each blade's rasp. In this hell, brotherhood found its strength. A horn blast filled the air, signaling the legion's enveloping maneuver. The Romans tried to close the vise on the exhausted pack. When Spartacus saw the move, he raised the flag and shouted a Thracian order, "To the breach! For freedom!" Galvanized, the insurgents broke the enemy's cohesion in a savage charge. Each sword struck the air, each shield crashed against the human wall of legionaries. The battle's turning point played out there in the heart of the storm. Crixus, wounded in the thigh, staggered and fell, but his companions lifted him, forming a rampart of bodies around him. Gannicus executed a daring hook, freeing the loyal Gaul, and all traded their wounds for heightened vigilance. Spartacus, panting, charged one last time, piercing the breach and carving a path toward Crassus himself. The governor, on horseback, fixed Spartacus with eyes of dark fire. Their blades met, steel against steel, the clashes echo, resonating like a divine clamor. Around them, the melee faded. Soldiers and insurgents paused to watch this titanic duel. Each of Spartacus's parries was a poem of blood and destiny. Each of Crassus's ripostes thundered like lightning. When the Thracian blade dented the Roman steel, Crassus recoiled, surprised. But legionary discipline prevailed. A loyal centurion threw a dagger. It struck Spartacus's shoulder, drawing a cry of pain and farewell. The man with the red flag staggered, his head turned toward the horizon he would never see, his gaze filled with the hard gleam of inner victory. He fell to one knee, hand clenched around his gladius, as if to hold it a moment longer. The last rays of a sun glowed on his battered armor, tracing a halo of steel and blood. In a hoarse breath, he murmured in Thracian, "Freedom is a torch no mortal hand can extinguish, not even death." Crassus, standing, gazed at the rebel's still body, a proud silhouette even in defeat. A sacred silence enveloped the battlefield, and the mist, complicit, seemed to hold its breath. Then in a sudden crash the Roman line broke, overwhelmed by emotion and admiration. The insurgents, galvanized by their leader's heroism, redoubled their fervor and definitively shattered the vice. At nightfall, Spartacus's body was laid on a red cloth shroud. Sacred flames were lit, and the insurgent pack formed a final circle. Each placed an offering, a blunted sword, an empty gourd, a relic of a childhood dream. A guttural chant rose, a distant echo of Thracian hymns, until the full moon's clarity flooded the plain with its silver specter. It is said that on cloudless nights a silhouette still appears near the old camp's ruins. A warrior in armor, draped in red cloth, Gladius pointed toward the horizon. It is said his cry, a fusion of anger and promise, splits the air to remind the oppressed of the inextinguishable flame of freedom. And thus Spartacus, fallen on the battlefield, became a legend, the wolf of Thrace, whose spirit forever haunts broken chains and freed hearts. The legacy of the Thracian wolf. Spartacus walked an extraordinary path from the ancient mists of Thrace to the bloodied sands of the Roman arena and the flickering fires of revolt. By turns, hunter, smith, slave, gladiator, and war leader, he always drew from his roots the call of the forests and the strength of the lunar wolf to transcend the chains that sought to break his spirit. His character was forged in trial, patience honed by hammer blows on the anvil, a sense of collectivity sculpted in the shared suffering of initiation rites, courage sharpened in every duel. He proved that true power lies not in the size of arms or the brutality of the blade, but in the unyielding will of a man who refuses to bend under oppression. Leading a motley pack, he established a blood brotherhood where each, from Celt to Syrian, German to Gaul, found new honor. Through his tactical victories and keen strategic sense, he challenged the most disciplined army of the ancient world, reminding all that freedom is a flame born in the heart and spread through the unity of souls. His fall, however cruel, did not extinguish that fire. On the contrary, it made it shine through history. Spartacus remains a universal symbol, the man who dared to reinvent his destiny and rally the oppressed to his cause. His legacy lives in every cry of resistance against injustice, in every dream of deliverance. For as his final breath whispered, freedom once won, no mortal hand can fully extinguish. Thus, the wolf of Thrace continues to howl in the nights of hope, inspiring generations to rise together and break their own chains. Thank you for joining me tonight on this journey through history. I hope this tale has brought you peace and wonder. Don't forget to subscribe to Twilight Tales for more stories to guide you into a serene sleep. Take care and see you soon.